Hello, I'm Always This is the series where we meet some of the most influential and best-loved musicians in the world and take a look at the seminal first musical moments that shaped their lives and their careers. And we start this series with a man whose iconic guitar playing, songwriting skills and distinctive vocals shaped some of the biggest-selling albums in the history of the world. He found acclaim as a member of Pink Floyd, but his solo career continues apace with the release of his new album, Rattle That Lock. My guest on The First Time this week is David Gilmour. David's never really sought the spotlight, content as he is to play music rather than talk about it. But here we sit down and discuss his life and his influences, his love of the 60s folk scene, his experiences in 1967 meeting the Floyd and their mercurial frontman Syd Barrett, and how he coped with the huge fame that followed the release of the band's legendary 1973 album, The Dark Side of the Moon. He also talks about helping discover Kate Bush, his collaborations with author and writer Polly Samson, and how the death of his friend and Floyd keyboardist Richard Wright has had an impact on his new material. We also tracked down David's first ever recordings by his band Jokers Wild, a 1965 disc that was never released commercially and is so rare we've had to find a copy at the British Library's National Sound Archive. But I start, as I do with all my guests, by asking David when he was first aware of music.
When I was a young child, I suppose the radio was incredibly varied, and we were exposed to all sorts of music on what was, I guess, the light program in those days. And my parents, who spent some time in America, had quite a collection of strange old 78s of blues records. So I was immersed, actually. My parents weren't in music, but they were very musical. So we lived in a household with a lot of it going on all around us.
What was your relationship like with that music? Was it something that you found yourself drawn to?
Yes, I loved it. All these old songs like Lazy Bones and stuff were on old 78 records. And Life Gets Tedious, don't it? Do you know that one? Fantastic old song. Which were sort of, American sort of old 78s of a sort of blues, but sort of hillbilly music as well a little bit. But the first record I bought, and that really sort of turned me around a bit, was Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley.
You were like
when I was 10.
10 years old? Because, I mean, the idea of that is the context was there wasn't anything to there was no reference point for that music when it came out.
That to me is everyone, I guess, has slightly different memories or different things that have sparked them off, but that was the first moment where I thought, this is something new and exciting and original. It was superseded within not very long by Heartbreak Hotel, Elvis Presley, which was a step up again. But that first moment with Rock Around the Clock was just, it's very hard to describe how sort of new and revolutionary that sounded to me at the time.
When did you first pick up a guitar? And what was that guitar like, and was it awful?
The very first time I picked up a guitar, I think, was when my next door neighbour, Bill, was given one by his parents, and he had no interest in it whatsoever.
So it wasn't even yours?
It wasn't even mine, no, but I played it at his house, and then I think I asked if I could borrow it, and then I think I forgot to give it back.
Who were you emulating? Whose style were you trying to copy at that time?
It's so broad, it's so varied, from folk music, from Pete Seeger was, I had a Pete Seeger guitar tutor record when I was about 13 or something like that, which is an album with, the first track was the 6 notes of the 6 strings of a guitar played to tune to, because he thought, you needed to get your guitar in tune.
That's lovely, I love that.
That was fantastic. And then a chord of D, which he then taught you a song, which you just strummed one chord and could do a song, and instantly you could accompany yourself. It was great.
What's the Pete Seeger track we should play at this juncture?
I can't remember what the song was that's on it, but it's a Pete Seeger guitar tutor record that had a proper LP in those days, 12-inch, and it had a big book inside it which showed you all the chord shapes.
Fantastic.
That is where I learned guitar.
What about your first live music experience?
It was probably one of those pop package tours in Cambridge when I was a kid, where all sorts of people, the Shadows and Gene Pitney and the Everly Brothers, I mean, the people who wandered through every town in those days is like a who's who of rock and roll. You'd be staggered these days.
Each doing about 15 minutes, and that was it?
Yeah.
Can you remember who you saw? Yeah, because you've talked about the Shadows, you've talked about Hank Marvin being someone that you looked up to quite a lot.
Hank was one of the big influences. It's like playing a tune, playing a melody, and I'm by nature I'm a melodic sort of person. So it's great to be able to combine that sort of thought of melody in music with a more bluesy approach and try and make something that falls somewhere in between all those things.
What was your first band like? Everyone's first band normally has a terrible name, and normally most of the gigs take place in like a living room somewhere.
I think the first band I actually properly joined was called the Newcomers.
Appropriate name.
And we were rubbish. We were dreadful. I wasn't a singer, I was just the guitar player.
What cover versions did you do rubbish versions of?
Do you know, I really can't remember. I can't remember what we did. It's a long, long time ago. Then I formed a band with some other guys, which we called Jokers Wild, and that was more ambitious. Did lots of Beach Boys songs. We were into big harmony stuff, Four Seasons, and all sorts of R&B records, of the time, and the Beatles, everything. Covers of absolutely everything that was fun.
And apparently, like, one of the rarest, most collectible bits of vinyl, there was like sort of 8 copies of something that you pressed up, isn't it? I was reading about this.
Yeah, we recorded 5 tracks. We went up in the van from Cambridge to London, and went to the studio Regent Sound in Denmark Street, and recorded 5 tracks, and put 2 on a double-sided single, and put 5 on a single-sided album. We printed 50 of each and sold them to our local fans back in Cambridge. I still have the master tape, though.
Really? David Gilmour's first ever recording by his band Jokers Wild from 1966. They recorded an EP of cover versions, and you heard a medley of that, which included Why Do Fools Fall in Love, Walk Like a Man, Don't Ask Me What I Say, Big Girls Don't Cry, and Beautiful Delilah. Only 50 copies of that were ever pressed, and it's now an incredibly rare record. So rare, in fact, we couldn't find a copy, so we had to enlist the help of the British Library Sound Archive to get that recording complete.
Music.
Bob Dylan, your first experience with Bob Dylan, because that's obviously someone who's had an impact on you. Didn't your dad send you a record from the States, is that right?
My mum and dad were living in the States in 1960-61, and for my 16th birthday, they sent me 2 or 3 albums. One was Bob Dylan's first album in March 62. That was, I think that's before it came out even in England.
Oh.
I also had the Complete Newport Folk Festival 1959, and a guy called Eric Darling, who had Walk Right In. You remember that song, Walk Right In? The rooftop singers.
Right. What did you find appealing about the kind of folk scene? Because the music coming out of Greenwich Village is a very different world to...
Yeah. I was like a sponge, I think. I mean, I didn't specialise in one form or the other. I just loved all different types of music. For everything, the blues, Eric Clapton when he started, was a big influence. Hank, as I said, and folk music. It all has I suppose you'd say, combined in my subconscious to help create what I've tried to do ever since.
Can you remember the first rehearsal with Pink Floyd, the first time?
I can't remember the very first one, but I can remember one of the very first ones, which was in a school in North London, and we were all together, and it was with Sid as well, and he got us trying to learn a new song called Have You Got It Yet? And this is kind of legendary, and we played along with it and played this song for hours, it felt like, and every time he played it differently. So we never did get it yet, because every time we joined in, he was doing it slightly differently, and it was some elaborate, strange joke that he was playing on us, which I can remember that day clearly.
Straight from the start, did it feel like there was something special happening when you individuals played? That alchemical thing when certain people play together. Some of its familiarity.
I couldn't really say that about my early moments with Pink Floyd. I thought that I could make them better, and I was trying to understand what they were trying to get at, which I didn't completely get right at the beginning, and it took me some time to get really into the flow of what they were attempting. Well, my background was mostly covers of pop songs, you know, and I was moving into uncharted territory, moving into this sort of psychedelic thing, which I did like, but it took a while to find my feet and to know what to do.
73, so Dark Side comes out. It's kind of your first experience with big mainstream success, the kind of success that there isn't really a map for. Did you enjoy it? Did you deal with it well, do you think?
It seems like a long time, it's a lifetime in pop music, you know, but I joined in January 68, and that was over 5 years later, and for those 5 years we had been building up our stockpile of records, if you like, on all our music, and our audiences were growing and growing. We had, before Dark Side of the Moon, done shows at big places like the Hollywood Bowl, stuff like that, so it was a very gradual trajectory. And I'm very pleased, very glad that it took a long time of very gradual movement towards success. I think that it helped.
Rather than a sudden leap.
I think that sudden leap is a dangerous one for a lot of people.
Do you think, looking back, you're like, okay, I managed to navigate that level?
Not flawlessly, I have to say, Matt, not flawlessly.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, all the usual trials and tribulations and temptations of the rock and roll life were dabbled with, you know.
But you survived.
Yeah.
My guest this week is David Gilmour, and that was There's No Way Out of Here from David's first self-titled solo album. Your first solo record.
Yeah.
I mean, there's like 4 solo records in 37 odd years. It's not a lot.
It's a massive output, isn't it? I don't know how I managed to keep that up.
Do you work better within a band environment, do you think, or used to?
Now I'm finding it great to be working sort of on my own and with some chosen people. But the initial band environment is one that I did really like and thought I was well suited to, more than being a solo. It was never really an ambition to be a solo artist, but it sort of comes upon you. And the band environment that you get into when you're very young, and you have an absolute lack of respect for anyone that you're with, and you know, treat them all as badly as you can treat your family, is something that, as you get older and more successful and set in your ways, it's very hard to recreate, and people around often tend to defer to me too much. And I'm not always right, strangely.
That first solo record is lovely. I was going back and listening to it. It's got some lovely stuff on it. It's a beautiful record. Because from that sessions, with the first kind of genesis of Comfortably Numb comes from that era, doesn't it?
Well, yes. We recorded it in a studio in the south of France called Super Bear. And I did write and play the very first sort of demo guitar strumming of what became Comfortably Numb there. But it was too near the end of the sessions to progress it, I'm rather pleased to say.
It's not the first Fender Stratocaster, but it's got the first serial number, the one that went 0001. It's become this almost mythic instrument. Does it appear on many records?
It's been on one or two, but I can't remember which ones it's on.
It's one of the most famous guitars.
It is on that first solo album back in '78. It's definitely on the first track on that.
It's literally the sort of holy grail for many.
It's a very, very nice guitar. It's a lovely guitar, but it feels light and it feels a bit fragile, and I don't want to leave it lying around.
How do you get it?
Well, when you're touring around, people come up, and there are all sorts of guitar specialists, particularly in the States, who hawk guitars that they've found, and my
with a sort of open jacket. Here you are, mate. All right,
that sort of thing.
Got 0001 here. You fancy it?
Yeah, and that one came through my road manager chap, Phil Taylor, and he bought it initially, and then I suggested that he sell it to me.
I've got a good idea for you here.
Gracefully. There's a lot of fuss about how people get their guitar sounds, but 90% of people's guitar sound is in their fingers. It's in the way they play it, and sometimes an anomaly of timing between your left and right hand or something just gives you a certain sound, or the way you use your fingers to pluck the strings. Anyone could go, I could go into any music store around the country and pick up a perfectly good guitar, amplifier and a couple of pedals and sound exactly like me. It's not, I think far too much fuss is made over the gear. You obviously want a nice, powerful, good amplifier and a nice guitar. But after that, I think it's mostly in the fingers.
I'd like to ask you about the first time you met Kate Bush.
A guy I know called Ricky Hopper was a friend of Kate's brother. And he came to me one day and said, I've got this tape of this 15-year-old girl singing. I think she's talented, and he played it to me, and I agreed that I did think she was very talented. But her unusual vocal style and sound, I thought it was unlikely that record companies, A&R people, would get it. I was not convinced that they would get it instantly. So after some various tryouts, I decided to employ a full studio, Air Studios in London, with Jeff Emmerich engineering, and with a friend of mine, Andrew Powell, producing and arranging. And I chose 2 or 3 songs out of about 50 that she had.
50, wow.
And I didn't spend a long time choosing. I just sort of thought, we'll have one nice slow one sort of medium tempo, one like this, and I just out of these things think that one, and we'll do those to releasable level, so that they weren't demos, so that they were actually properly ready to go tracks. And I thought that was the best way to take her to the record companies, to convince them. And the song The Man with the Child in His Eyes was one of those 3.
Do you play guitar on Slave to the Rhythm by Grace Jones? Is this true?
Well, there are a number of versions of Slave to the Rhythm, and I did play on one. Trevor asked me to come down to a studio somewhere, I've no idea where it was, and asked me to play something on this track called Slave to the Rhythm, which I duly did. He was in agony. He had really bad stomach cramps, and he was lying on the floor moaning for the entire duration of the session. And that's all I can really remember about it. I'm not sure that I've ever actually heard it, or could actually pinpoint which bit was me, because the way some of those records got made was unusual. I think it was the early Fairlight recording systems, and the manipulation of the sounds that you could do afterwards, which we all do all the time now, makes it sometimes hard to spot which bit's you.
But you didn't have a chance to hang out with the incomparable Miss Grace Jones?
I have hung out with Grace a few times. Well, not hung out with her, but I have met her a few times. She's a wild woman.
Yeah, phenomenal. Yeah. Leonard Cohen. Yeah. When did you first fall in love with Leonard Cohen? Because people either love Leonard or just don't get it, but the people that love him tend to love him.
I've always loved Leonard Cohen, and I can... I have, those snapshot memories where you can think, there was a moment I can remember distinctly driving down the M1 in the van or in a car or something off from a gig in probably 1968 or 69, listening to a track of Leonard Cohen on the radio. and thinking how dour and dry and depressed it sounded in a kind of a wonderful way. It's very nice to hear how he's cheered up.
What song of his should we play at this juncture?
Famous Blue Raincoat, maybe. I like that one. I like a load of them.
When was your first musical collaboration with Polly?
The first musical collaboration with Polly was on the Division Bell album, and I was, I guess, trying to inveigle her into helping me to write lyrics.
Did she need much inveigling?
No, she wanted me to do it, but she was willing to help, and she did much more, actually, than is sort of indicated on the record sleeve. Sort of a dishonesty or something, I suppose, at the time, where it looked like I had done more of it than I had, in fact, done, but there we are. She really, really pretty much wrote most of several of the songs on that album. Great moments, though. Terrific. High Hopes, it was a high point of the writing on that album.
Has it always been very easy to work in the musical sphere with her?
Yeah, it's much more than just lyrics. She has comments, brutally honest comments on almost every aspect of every song that we're doing. And she's always worth listening to.
The moment you think so.
High Hopes was a good moment at the time.